So next part of Laboratory 9 is to examine the render function in the model class. Okay, so let's find the rendering function right here, and this is our section of the code which executes every time we display the new frame. And so of course it's over here as well. So let's open our vertex shader to look at the vertex shader input parameters. It's called texture shader underscore v. So let's open this one. If texture coordinates are present in our object model, we call enable vertex attribute array and identify it with this input vector. So these are our UV coordinates, right? So we're activating this input in the vertex shader. Next, we have to enable GL texturing, 2D texturing. And then, if you recall, we already discussed this. We set the current texture unit to be, this is the based value for the first initial texture unit available. So essentially we activating this texture unit right here with this call, active texture. Then we also already have obtained the texture memory buffer object ID. So this is our texture memory buffer object ID, and we're now using it to bind this texture, right? So essentially also activating this specific texture. So now the texture unit right here will be sampling this internal texture image that we already uploaded when the application has started. So now this is ready to go, and it happens per every frame. And then we use this identifier to tell the texture sampler uniform, which is identified by this texture ID, to start using texture unit 0. So this call basically specifies to the texture sampler variable inside the fragment shader to use this specific texture unit. So we have this complete setup so that our fragment shader can start sampling the actual colors from this texture image in the GPU memory. So we don't have to make any changes here in the rendering member function, but it's important to understand what individual parts are doing as part of rendering each frame. Okay, so then let's go back to our vertex shader. And this will be our number 3 on our list of things to do. And observe that there is a new variable, the texture coordinate. Okay, so these are UV coordinates coming into our shader. And there's also a new output variable called texture coordinate. As you can see, the vertex shader really doesn't do anything with UV coordinates. It just simply passes the data through like this, right? And this goes over to the fragment shader as its own input, right? Is its own interpolated input. So this goes as output over to the fragment shader, to the next stage in our OpenGL rendering pipeline. So this is all trivial, and we really don't have to change anything here. So next, let's open the fragment shader. Now we're on to number 4 of things to do on our list. Okay, so this is our fragment shader, texture shader underscore f. Okay, and this is where the fragment shader receives the interpolated texture coordinates, UV coordinates, from the vertex shader that we just discussed. And of course, this is our texture sampler, 2D texture sampler, which is already bound to this texture unit 0, right? So this texture sampler, it's this part of our diagram, and it's already bound to our texture unit 0.